what I'll probably do later is, and possibly, I may not need to, but sometimes I'll record like a intro or outro at the end and tag it on. So
I was just thinking, we should have really planned this so that we're wearing the exact same kind of shirt.
I do have a purple polo shirt and glasses. I'm strongly tempted to go do that. So, oh my gosh.
Well, it's the equivalence of truth and the logos, right?
Talk about reflection of truth. So, this is all good. I think I'm going to keep this in there somewhere and maybe start with it. Gracious gang, it's Mike, host of the Gracious Guest Show, and I'm really excited because that little clip you just saw was from the extended interview I'm about to share here in a second with you with my good friend Charles Comer. And Charles is a philosophy professor at Harrisburg Area Community College. And I got to meet him a couple years ago just through some friends, and we really just hit it off in discussing all things philosophy and theology. And he has a very interesting story himself, coming from a very sort of not necessarily friendly to Catholicism kind of worldview, and really kind of had this conversion experience through really philosophy and theology and kind of where they meet. And so these conversations that we have from time to time are always very intriguing to me, and I know I always get a lot out of it because I think sometimes we shy away from doing the sort of the hard work intellectually that it can actually take to really pursue the Lord in the way that He wants us to. You know, and I think in the gospel, when they encounter Jesus and they say, "Rabbi, where are you staying?" And what does He say? "Come and see. Come and see." You know, Jesus always has this this invitation about Him to follow Him, to go where He's going, right? Follow me, come and see. You know, it's not so much He just shows up and just gives you what you need to save you and that's it, you know? There's this ongoing invitation to go ever deeper into the heart and to the mind that He gave us, and to really discover Him there, to discover what He's trying to communicate to us there. And so our topic today, as you saw on the title of this video, is Truth is Someone, as opposed to something. And so we're going to get into that here in just a second. So without further ado, let me jump into my back porch, beautiful day interview with my friend Charles Comer on the topic really of truth. So check it out. Yep. Okay. Charles Comer, thank you for joining me today on the Back Porch Studio.
It is my pleasure. It's great to be here. Great to see you again, my friend.
Well, and we have quite a stack of stuff here, so we're going to be referencing quite a few things throughout, no doubt. But as far as, I don't know how you want to kind of kick this off. I mean, I've given you some notes. You had some notes. Did you want to? Well, let me pitch it to you this way. What is truth?
Let me
just throw that out at the front. Yeah.
Let me. So maybe what I'll do is throw down another gauntlet to you.
Okay.
And go in this direction and say that what is true, inasmuch as it is true, is something that we have a passion for. And as Socrates has said before, he is not wise, but he has an eros for wisdom, which is, to my mind, the same as saying that he has an eros, or a desire, for the truth, right? And so I wanted to start out with that idea because I find it to be useful, quite provocative, and in some ways leads us to what we might think of as a passion for the Lord. How does that grab you?
I think that's good. Because and we'll probably bounce around and bounce back to this too. Because I'm thinking there might be something even there that gets to the whole, like the personhood of God, especially the ultimately the three persons, because I mean I have a desire for certain kinds of food. We have desire for pleasant experiences, but I think the greatest desires, at least in my life, have to do with relationship, and that desire for meaning and friendship and love and all those kinds of things. So that's just interesting that with him discussing that passion for the truth that way, it almost feels like there's a little bit of a glimmer there of more than just an abstraction there, some substantial, something, someone I can have a relationship with.
Yes, and well, let me give you another illustration of this, and this comes again from Socrates, or really from Plato. And I know when I've talked about this with my students, they always found it to be a very interesting, I hate that word, but very, very useful idea. And it comes from the Symposium, which is this really, engaging dialogue of Plato's that, it's basically like a dinner party, right? And all of the people there in attendance offer something to the effect of, what is love, right? What is desire? What is eros? And then it's Socrates' turn. And Socrates gives this story about his encounter with this strange woman named Diotima. And she relates all these various mysteries of love, but the one it's called the greater mystery of love, right? Really the second one, maybe more simply called like the idea of the ladder of love, and how that begins. Like, so we have these desires for simple things, in the words of the Symposium, maybe like a body, right? Finding something attractive, something that compels you to it. Then from that one thing, we start seeing in other things echoes of what we found attractive in that one thing. So then we start going outward, right, to other corporeal things that share those qualities. But then we start getting deeper and going further in this idea that we become attracted to the very ideas of what might qualify as attractive to, in the words of Socrates, like just laws, or I don't know if anybody has any, eros for just laws, but I think in some
maybe things
sense
would be better if we did. No.
Yeah, right, yeah. And it goes on up the ladder until ultimately they say, the what we're really desiring is and all of these different things, beauty itself.
Okay.
Right. So I mean, we go from thing to thing, and it's a very beautiful discourse. But ultimately, the idea is that we start with particular things and get more and more abstract, but at the same time, and I'm hesitant to use that word abstract because I don't want to.
Because it's not disconnected.
It's just not disconnected.
It's abstract in fact,
it's
you can't point to one thing necessarily and say it's all there.
It's the most real thing, right?
Okay,
we're ultimately aiming toward beauty itself, because all things that we are attracted to participate in that beauty. And from there, it's not a small leap to get to the good as well.
Sure.
Right. And the good, you started out asking me what truth is, and this is where we, I think, really get into the thick of things. And I'll start here with the more Platonic idea, and then we can get into some other things as well. Let me, if you'll permit me, let me read you a little bit of Book 7 from the Republic, right? That's the famous part with the cave.
Right.
Okay? All right, let's see.
I'll have to send you the link later. I found it. There's a T-shirt with the cave on it that I saw recently.
Oh, yeah, there's lots of...
Yeah, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so... yeah, there's many fun things about Plato and Socrates. Yeah, we're always in the cave. So this is from book 7. This is at 517b. And he's having a conversation with this fellow named Glaucon, who's actually Plato's brother. And they were just talking about this idea of the cave. Socrates says, well then, my dear Glaucon, I said, this image as a whole must be connected with what was said before. Liken the domain revealed through sight to the prison home, and the light of the fire in it to the sun's power. Now, maybe I should pause here and just give some background. Socrates gives this image of these prisoners in a cave. All right, they're chained. They can't really move their head. All they are seeing is this screen that is projected with shadows of various things. You know, chairs and glasses and whatever it might be.
Right.
All the mundane objects, animals and so forth. And maybe there's someone in the background making sounds that attach to those kind of things. So Socrates poses the problem of, well, what if one of those prisoners got out and made it out of the cave into the light of the sun, right? And, you know, what we might even call it the pure light of being.
Yeah.
Say the pure light of being. You know, and then he goes back, and he tries to explain to the other prisoners in the cave what they're seeing is not necessarily real, and so forth. That, you know, maybe they're actually trapped. Trapped in what?
Right.
You know, that's another
a whole conversation. Yeah.
That's well, it's an important thing for maybe later, but
Right.
and you know, even we have this idea that I'm sure we're going to hit on it at one point, that there's this notion that the truth is also freedom. You know, that when we get into the light of the truth, that we can really understand, and that when we're encumbered by opinions, particularly false opinions and whatnot, then we are becoming more and more encumbered. And that's we'll reserve that for a moment.
Right,
That's
right,
a wonderful that's a wonderful idea too. But so anyway, that's where we are in this story. But he goes on. And in applying the going up and the seeing of what's above to the soul's journey up to the intelligible place, you'll not mistake my expectation, since you desire to hear it. A God doubtless knows if it happens to be true. At all events, this is the way the phenomena look to me. In the knowable, the last thing to be seen, and that with considerable effort, is the idea of the good. All right, that is the eidos, the essence, the idea of the good. But once seen, it must be concluded that this is in fact the cause of all that is right and fair in everything. In the visible, it gave birth to light, and it's sovereign. In the intelligible, it is sovereign itself. It provided truth and intelligence, and that the man who is going to act prudently in private or in public must see it. What do you think of that?
I don't want to jump the gun, but I got to get a
Please.
reference here quick.
Yeah, no.
Well, let me do this, because what immediately came to mind... Where are you at here? The first... John, it's the second letter of John. I just used this the other day in class, and I think, no, we don't quote these very often. No, it was the first letter. Very beginning. What was from the beginning, what we have heard, what we have seen with our eyes, what we looked upon and touched with our hands concerns the word of life, for the life was made visible. We have seen it and testified to it and proclaimed to you that the eternal life that was with the Father and was made visible to us. What we have seen and heard and proclaim now to you, so that you too may have fellowship with us, for our fellowship is with the Father and with his Son, Jesus Christ. And then he adds, we are writing this so that our joy may be complete.
So the reason that just popped into mind, because there's this whole thing throughout the gospel, obviously, that, you know, this argument that this is not just, you know, and when I say just an abstraction, but it's not an abstraction. This isn't, you know, something that's completely outside of the reach anymore. Something that sort of penetrated into our categories, you know, which is, it's so weird, because for me, I mean, there's so many ways you could go with this. I think for me, what the really amazing thing is to think about Jesus, and I should have mentioned this earlier, one of the background texts we have scripturally, I think, behind this conversation here today is Pilate asking what is truth, you know, which I mentioned earlier. But the fact that, ironically, just a few chapters before that in John's Gospel, Jesus has told his friends, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Not I have it, not I am the best source of truth, you know, I'm the most truthful teacher. There's this bizarre, as far as I can tell, completely unique claim to be substantially himself the truth. You know, so that's kind of the background of all of this, you know, obviously, but that first thing that popped in my mind when you mentioned that last part about seeing, you know, was that claim that there were some guys in Palestine 2,000 years ago who were walking around claiming to have seen and touched and eaten with this man who said he himself was the truth. So
Yeah,
that's
the
all
logos.
that came
I
to
mean,
mind, right?
It's
You know,
a fantastic idea, right?
like, if it's not true, it's insane to be saying something quite that blunt, you know, and that I honestly, I can feel like I can kind of, I think I have more respect for someone who thinks that I'm absolutely insane for believing that, than someone who just was like, well, yeah, you know, that's, you have your opinion and I have mine, and, you know, it's just, it's like, it's such a out there kind of thing to claim, you know, that's, for me at least, in the background of some of the stuff I was hoping to get to here today. Like, what does that really mean? You know, he is the truth, you know. So
Let's
we're getting at it today at some point.
let's add another another layer maybe and see what you think of this proposition, and we'll move from Plato right now to Aristotle and Thomas. Right? Aristotle proposes this notion of a telos, right? Of potentiality and actuality, right? Where actuality is something like the perfection of a thing, right? When it becomes what it is, right? It's eidos, you know, to state the essence of something is to tease around it at its truth. Now, let's pause there too and go back to the question that I dodged in the beginning. What is truth?
Well, it wasn't really fair the way I no.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
It's a fun way to start. So
yeah. So, you know, Father Mike Schmitz, who I think we both think is a great guy.
Yeah.
Great priest. He used this expression about truth, and I find it to be very useful and just it's pithy and it's also, I think, profound. Truth is what is, right?
Yeah.
It's what is. Now, what does that mean? You know, what is? Here we start looking at what is, you know, to be cheeky and throw in you know the some kind of essential language, like what is isness?
Right.
You know.
I'm writing this down, by the way.
What is
isness? Yeah. What gives something its?
Yeah. What gives something its whatness? Right?
Yeah.
It's to be. Now, one answer might be, and you know, coming out of the Platonic tradition, is we have this idea of the good. You know, the good is when something is most what it is has a deeper and more penetrating participation in the form of the good, which is an expression that is cumbersome, but I think it's useful. So it participates in the form of the good, and consequently, too, you know, when we think about the transcendentals, truth, beauty, and goodness, if it's, participating in the good, it's equally participating in the beautiful, and it is most what it is. So it's
Right.
it's in the truth as well.
Would you say that those three, just real quick, that those are distinct but co-equal in a sense? I'm not trying to be too Trinitarian here, but I think there is something they're not interchangeable insofar as they're, I mean, there's something distinct about truth, goodness, and beauty, but where one is, the other two are. I mean, if it's in its fullest sort of expression.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
That is fair, man. And I have been pondering that myself. I'm hesitant, and I know where you're going with this. You can't trick me there, Mr. Green.
I wasn't trying to. But far
I
be
know
it
where
from-
you're going with that, and I think like, okay, well, if it's if it's maybe analogous to the Trinity, which I don't think that's out of the question to suggest that, because you're right. I mean, where one is, the other one is. But then there's the problem of, okay, which
which one is which, or
which one is
is
which?
that
Yeah,
fair?
yeah,
Even
and-
because
and
like it's not that the Holy if the Son is the truth, it doesn't mean the Holy Spirit's not true or truth, because I think it's maybe more not complicated, but maybe more mysterious than that. I don't know if that's a fair word.
yeah. Let me
yeah.
offer this to you.
Sure.
How about we at some point, after we've spent some good time with Augustine's work on the Trinity, we'll come back and we'll have a deep conversation.
Yeah. Oh yeah, please.
the Trinity, because that's a mystery to me, right?
Yeah.
And and it's easy. These are both things that I think are easy to posit, but then to get at the truth of them is a little bit trickier. And
Sure.
But going back, I think there's certainly something there.
Yeah.
I mean,
And I kind of derailed you too when you were talking
that's
about
okay.
Aquinas, or about Aristotle, and potentially
right.
Aquinas too. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think what I was trying to suggest is that there is something about the actuality of something, right? That that relates it to not only its truth as a particular species, a particular maybe within a a certain realm of species, and then further in a certain realm of genus, that points it toward the truth. So, for example, you and I we're both men in the generic sense and men in the more particular sense, right? So I think both of those categories, right, have their own kind of telos to them, their own fulfillment, right? But also there's Mike Creevy-ness,
Yes.
right? And there's Charles Comer-ness,
Yeah.
and how am I to become, what is my fulfillment? What is my actuality? Right? That would say, where am I then deriving the truth of who and what I am?
Yeah. Where's that coming from?
Where is that coming from?
Because
Mr. Creevy?
it's not just it's that tension between being and becoming. Because it's like I am something. I have a history. I'm here presently, but there's this. Like, I couldn't escape it if I tried, I have through my sins, right? You try to escape this nagging sense of a perfected you. Like, where in the world is that coming from?
Well,
it's more than just aspiration, for like, I want all of this money, or I want this achievement. There's like there is some sort of like desire or yearning to be something I'm not yet,
Let's go there for a minute.
Yeah.
Let's go there for a minute. Actually, there's two parts of that I think are really fascinating. One, I think, will lead us to the Christological paradigm, right? Um, and pondering the idea if as Christ is the truth. Now, that, to my mind, would seem to cover both, on the one hand, the truth of us as men, human beings in the
Right.
generic sense, as men also in the specific sense, and perhaps also as our particular, Mike Creeviness and Charles Comerness, right?
Yeah.
So there's something there on the one hand. Now, on the other side of that, and I think these are both shades of the same thing. There is this. Let me make sure. Let me pause and gather my thoughts. Where I was going with that. Oh, right. Okay. You mentioned the idea of sin or things like this, right? And a fault. So the idea that Plato discusses, and I think this is useful in this regard, right? And Augustine too. Maybe actually even Augustine is a better example of this.
Who was himself more Platonic than
right?
or than Aristotelian, correct? Is that-
Yes.
okay.
Yeah. So the Greek word for truth, you know what that is, right?
Is it aletheia or
Aletheia,
Aletheia?
exactly, right? So, lethe, right, means something like hiddenness, right? It's when it's related to our word latent, So if you have
okay.
a latent tendency for
Yeah, I don't think I knew that. That's cool.
for golf or something like that,
Yeah.
right? You can tease that out. This idea of latency, right? So aletheia is this disclosedness, this unhiddenness,
Okay.
right, as it were, right?
Interesting.
You reveal something, which means that something is covering it up. Something is
Yeah.
covering it up. So, and the one of the ideas that we get from Plato would be something like what it's covering up, like doxa, right? These opinions about things.
Yeah.
And in most cases, right, when Socrates is talking about virtue and so forth, and see, it's even there in my dear friend Aristotle. When we are derailed through these other goods, the kind of things that entrap us, right? Like wealth, fame, power, our concupiscence, and so forth.
Yeah.
We are, in some sense, maybe even adding more layers to our,
Yeah.
our truth.
And I
Right.
like that you said goods too, because a lot, in most cases, not all the time, but in most cases, our sins do very much sort of center upon something that is, ontologically good, or on some level, it's a good thing. It's part of creation, but it's being misappropriated or
Yes, and that's the
Right.
eros too. We're
Right.
always
misdirected arrows.
we are
Right.
yes we're
Yeah.
Augustine, right?
Mm-hmm.
What does he say? My heart is restless until it rests in you.
Yes. Yeah.
And we keep on trying to find that thing that is going to fill that.
And didn't he also say, I don't know the Latin of it, my Latin friend is going to, get on my case. I wrote it on his board the other day, but my love is my gravity. The thing that I invest my heart in, or that I choose to put my investment in, is then where I'm going to find myself drawn time and again. So where am I anchoring myself?
Yeah.
So that too, the role of the will, obviously, in that is important.
Now, yeah,
yeah.
and here's another facet of this too, which I think is very fascinating. We don't want to necessarily say either that these things that are not so good, right? We'll just say, the evils, right? That they have a thingly quality to them, that they have an ontological nature to them.
Right.
But there are more privations,
Right.
So
that is very Augustinian, I think, too, right? Because there's I know there's a debate about that. To me, it seems pretty I say obvious, but I've just always felt like ever since I read that in him, it seemed to make more sense to me, the idea of some kind of privation or a misdirected good. That seemed to me more sensible in a sort of a biblical framework of a created universe that is fundamentally good. Because if you don't think that, obviously, then you're going to maybe run into some more of those philosophies of like Manichaeism or some of those things Augustine himself was
right, and that's the
drawn
problem.
to.
Exactly, that's the problem, because if evil has an ontological status as much as the good has an ontological status, then we have this conflict of two forms of being.
Right.
But rather, it's evil is the privation,
Yeah.
right? For example, and this is maybe a hard saying necessarily, but to the degree that I am not, that my the things that are keeping me away from my Charles Comerness, right, are in fact privations of my being.
Yeah.
They're privations of my being.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But by the same token, it's interesting because it's getting back to the meaning of the word truth here, because I had the note here on that too, because that's like you had down here, what is being unconcealed? Again, like how what's underneath that? This is, I guess it makes sense then in the context of the cave analogy that you mentioned earlier, that you're having this person who has seen the truth, so to speak, trying to unconceal it for his friends, who the frustration of that, because they don't have a context, necessarily for how do you even approach that, so that could be a whole other show in and of itself. How do we, like, if you have had an experience of Christ, but any lowercase t truth, any of the logoi, you know what I mean, out in the world, and then you're trying to sort of, I hesitate to say wake somebody up a little bit, but I think that's fair, or to bring this to them in a way that they can kind of understand it. That can be a real challenge, obviously. If they're not ready to see it, or they don't want to see it, maybe. So that's probably part of the challenge too.
I like the idea of the waking up. It reminds me of Dante, right? In the very beginning. I was so full of sleep that he just finds himself in the middle of the dark wood. And it's interesting too that when the freed prisoner in the cave comes back and tries to explain these things to those who are still captive, they get angry with him.
Right.
They don't like it. They're like, no, this is
right. Like,
what I'm seeing.
Are you crazy?
Here.
Like, what are you talking about?
This is what are you talking about? So,
well, and if I may, even I just thought, even the Israelites, you're in slavery for 430 years, and you're in the wilderness for a few weeks, in true freedom, and they're getting tired of it, and they like, well, look, at least in Egypt, it's like we were slaves, but at least we, it was something we knew what to expect, or something like that. You get that kind of attachment to what's familiar,
Yeah.
Even if what's familiar is terrible. That's a bizarre aspect of us too, I guess.
Yeah. With your permission, I'd like to read you a passage from Pseudo Dionysius,
Please
who I've
do.
always found is a very just a character that is as intriguing as he is ponderous.
And if I'm correct, Pseudo Dionysius, because he's not the Dionysius from Acts of the Apostles that Paul was dialoguing with, but a later gentleman. Yes.
Yes. I've actually I wouldn't mind being considered like Pseudo Charles or something. I think that would be like very fun.
Centuries later.
Yeah.
Pseudo Comer. No.
So this is from a short little work of his called The Mystical Theology. So already we're there, and this reminds me of it's certainly strongly in that vein of apophatic theology, right? Many years ago I read The Cloud of Unknowing. Have you ever read that?
A long time ago, yeah.
Yeah, that's actually that's worth revisiting. I think it's a very interesting book. So
I am taking real notes here, by the way. That's not
Yeah. All right, so this
Go
is
for it,
Pseudo Dionysius in his Mystical Theology, and the I guess what it would be the second part.
Mhm.
Right? What has actually to be said about the cause? And the translator capitalizes cause, so we have
Okay.
that, right? I think that's an important feature. What has actually to be said about the cause of everything is this: since it is the cause of all beings, we should posit and ascribe it to all the affirmations we make in regard to beings, and more appropriately, we should negate all these affirmations, since it surpasses all being. Now, we should not conclude that the negations are simply the opposite of the affirmations, but rather that the cause of all this is considerably prior to this, beyond privations, beyond every denial, beyond every assertion. I don't know what to make of that,
Yeah.
but
Gonna
there's
take a
something
walk in
about
the
it
woods
that is
for a while. And
there is
just
something
process,
about
yeah.
it that is I think is good and is potentially leading to a good direction, to a good place. A little bit further down in the next section, he says this too: it has neither word nor act of understanding, since it is on a plane above all this. And here he's talking about, I guess, this cause, right? It has neither word nor act of understanding, since it is on a plane above all this, and it is made manifest only to those who travel through foul and fair, who pass beyond the summit of every holy ascent, who leave behind them every divine light, every voice, every word from heaven, and who plunge into the darkness, where, as Scripture proclaims, there dwells the One, capitalize One, who is beyond all things. It is not for nothing that the blessed Moses is commanded to submit first to purification and then to depart from those who have not undergone this. I don't know what to make of that either, but it seems good. That is my...
I think what's stirring in me a little bit is just the unapproachable God. You know, the
I am
very,
that I am, right?
Yeah,
But
there's no by that scene, that incredibly fascinating, but and I'm careful of how I'm gonna how I'm gonna say this. Well, okay, I'll be a little cautious. The God's, at least on the surface of it, God's somewhat snarky, not snarky, that's the wrong word, but his response to Job. At the end, it was a Job chapter 38 or 39, somewhere there. The whole big thing of Job and all of his friends there with him, and just this miserable, horrible series of things that didn't just happen to Job, that God let happen to Job on purpose. And, you're just reading through this, you're waiting for this big moment, and when it comes down to it, God's longest speech in all of Scripture, and he doesn't really answer. Yeah, he doesn't give a reason for it. He doesn't, he doesn't do what you want him to do at all.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes you mad. Didn't make Job mad, apparently. He seemed to get it. But what I take away from it is just, at the end of the day, we're supposed to think about this stuff. We're supposed to ask him. We're supposed to come to him, with everything. But there's just some things that it's like there's a wall on this side. There's a wall we can't get through, a gap we can't get across, no matter how hard we try. That has to be bridged from his side. And somehow that's what he did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's...
For some reason. I know why. I know the answer is why, but it's still pretty profound. He didn't have to create anything. He didn't have to redeem anything once it fell. It's pretty incredible.
Now, you'll have to forgive me because I'm not as savvy with where things are in Scripture. Is this the part where God replies to Job, where were you when I created everything and so forth? Where, you know?
When I said snarky, because I imagine sometimes there's a whole like, yeah, okay, great. Are you done, Job? Okay.
Yeah.
Remember when I was creating every atom in the entire universe? Remember? Oh yeah, that's right. You weren't there. It's almost like this. Just you know who you're talking to, right? You're like, no, but it's still it's out of love, but it's a real sense of, let me give you a little bit of a taste here, friend, once more. You know, how incomprehensible of an infinite gap there is between you and me. You know, to try to give you a little taste of like, what makes you think you could even begin to understand anything that I could tell you? You know, like just trying to reinforce, he wants to be so close to us and he's so intimate with us, but by the same token, it's sometimes I think we lose sight of just the magnitude of what we can't possibly imagine about who we're addressing. You know, it's maybe that fear of the Lord is something in there too. You know, what's going on with that?
You know, I think this is a good segue into another problem that you and I had talked about prior to us meeting today, and that is you had phrased it, and you'll have to certainly kind of qualify it, but you had phrased it something like if truth is a who rather than a what, it's a little, it can't necessarily be. Maybe
because with the title of this particular episode being "Truth is Someone," because that was what really kicked off this. Just I had read that passage for like the millionth time in John 14? Yeah, I am the way and the truth and the life, and that too. I mean, he's the life, he's the light, like all of that in there too. But I was thinking about that. If truth is someone, and we talk about how like I want to know the truth, I want to get to the bottom of this, I want to be a truthful person, and the ways we use this word, like what is that? Am I kind of imagining that truth is like a thing that's out there that I can go collect up in my truth bag, so to speak?
Yes,
what I mean? Like I go around, I'm collecting little nuggets of truth. In which case, in that sort of goofy analogy, it's like I am the principal agent, and truth is just out there, like the old, was it the X-Files? Wasn't that like the X-Files tagline? The truth is out there.
Yeah.
And so, but I thought more mystically speaking here, this idea of if Jesus truly is the truth, like objective truth, absolute truth, the ground of all truth, whatever that entails, and he is not just a person, but he's one of the perfect three. He's the archetype of personhood. I think then, okay, well, persons that I know know you, know my wife, know my friends, know my employees, my employees. I don't have employees. My fellow coworkers. What the? Delusions of grandeur. Yeah. No, but the persons I know in my day-to-day life, there's a sacrosanct, thing there where it's like someone is different than something, So, obviously, it's one of the reasons slavery is so evil is because you cannot appropriately own a person. So I was thinking about that. I was like, so Jesus, he gives himself completely to us, but that's different than I take him, or I possess him. So this idea of what does that look like? That a relationship with the truth, or with Christ who is the truth. What does that relationship with truth look like? How does that made me? That's why I get back to what Socrates talking about, having this desire, this eros for the truth. I almost feel like there's like a seed there, of something that the Logos 400 years before he incarnated is communicating to Socrates.
A little tag on that.
Yeah.
When Peter Kreeft came to speak at our diocese a little while back at the men's conference, I asked him a question about Socrates, and Socrates, and Peter Kreeft is a big fan of Plato and Socrates and so forth.
And I'm a big fan of him.
Yes. So I asked him about Socrates' daimon, right? Socrates frequently in his dialogues he talks about this daimon that speaks to him and so forth, and I asked Peter Kreeft about that, and his explanation was that the daimon is he thought it was something like the Holy Spirit, and then he said something too. He's like, if Socrates isn't in heaven, I don't know. But maybe that's a heavy claim, but nevertheless,
he has to have at least as good a shot,
yeah,
as any pre-Christian sort of person of goodwill.
Yeah. I don't know if he's hanging out in limbo. Who knows? But tagging back on again to what we were just talking about, and this idea of truth is someone, and you can't necessarily get it. Here's another analogy that comes from the Cave, from book 7 in the Republic, where when this freed prisoner comes out, and he sees that the sun, the big star sun, not the SU. Although that would be an interesting,
the 93 million mile away thing. Yeah.
And he noticed, the sun is illumining everything, right? That makes everything visible what it is. So there's an analogy here that the sun is being itself, or the truth. Now, can you look at the sun?
Yeah. Or no.
You can. You can, but you're going. Right? But you shouldn't. You shouldn't, right? So you always have to look at the sun indirectly, right?
Right.
Through its reflections of things and so forth.
Right.
I find that to be a very interesting. Maybe even
no one has seen the Father. But that kind of
right.
No one can see God and
live. Or we think about the beatific vision and so forth.
Yeah.
But I find that just to be a very, both a useful parallel, but at the same time kind of a slightly troubling one, because we do know that Christ came back, he came back.
Yeah.
He came in human form, right? What does that mean? What did when?
How in the world did he pull that off?
Well, yeah. Was that the reflection? What do you think?
It's so interesting because it's, if I may approach that in a roundabout way as I try to just
I think the only way to approach it.
Yeah,
I don't know that it can,
Another thing, that another great analogy Peter Kreeft gave once, and I'm sure he didn't make it up per se, but like he was saying how a movie projector can project any image of anything in the entire world except one thing, and that's itself. Like it can't perfectly, it's the thing doing the projecting, but the action, the image that it's putting up there is still sort of inseparable from the projector. That's what it's coming out of. And I always feel like you're dancing around heresy with these kinds of things. That's why I think the creeds are so important, of course, because we're trying to, God knows we're trying to figure it out, or not figure it out, but trying to speak about it correctly. And so I think because God, so the Father, the principle of origination, if that's a word, the font, the source of all being,
subsistence,
right? Who's I love how Bishop Barron puts it. Who is the sheer act of to be itself.
Right.
He is existence. But because he's so perfect and so sort of diffusive of himself. Like he's pure generosity. That's just an aspect, or maybe the perfect aspect of who he is. He so perfectly expresses that it constitutes a second person, And I think it's hard I know for me it's hard. I think it's hard for all of us because we can't quite perfectly think about Father and Son without introducing into it time, or first and then someone comes later, and that's not how it is. I'm gonna sneeze.
Bless you.
No, we did that live.
Yeah.
So I think that's a hang up for us in one sense, because you can't quite imagine it without having that aspect of it. Like, well, first there was the Father, and then there's the Son. It's like, no, that sentence is wrong. You know, there is a Father, there is a Son. The Son is the perfect, you know, expression of the Father. I think I had it down here. I think John of the Cross said so much better than me. You know, the God the Father from all eternity spoke one word, and he has nothing else to say. You know, so this, because he's so infinitely perfect, he can essentially project or summarize everything entirely about himself, his attributes, his majesty, his glory, all of that. And that person that is that perfect expression of him is who becomes flesh. But how does that work? I have no idea. You know, because he somehow, the divine logos, you know, I had a professor once who put it so well. He's like, he said, bottom line, he's like, we have no idea. We have no way to know how a divine mind works, you know, from the inside, you know.
Yeah.
So how is it possible that you have this construction worker / carpenter who has to sleep and go to the bathroom and eat and gets scared, you know, and bleeds, who's also at the same time sustaining all of the entire universe in existence, you know? So
Yeah.
I don't know how he does that.
Yeah.
You know, he's in the manger, you know, nursing at the breast of the Blessed Mother and needing to be covered up, you know, and not exposed to the elements lest he die. Yet he is the ultimate logos, you know, at that moment too. He doesn't put that aside to then go do a human thing for a while.
Yeah.
So I feel like it makes more and more sense to me that, you know, you would have to be perfect and infinite and divine to be able to do that. Obviously, like, to be able to somehow do that and then at the same time maintain a legitimate, weak, frail, sort of vulnerable human existence.
Yeah. I'm gonna make a hot take.
Yeah.
Hot take. And I'm thinking of
I'll put that in the show notes. No.
a paradigm.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a paradigm, which is something like a mold.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So on the one hand, you have three parts of that.
Yeah.
You know, you have the concept of the thing to the product.
Yeah.
Right? The mold.
Yeah.
The mold itself, right? And then the actual thing.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Right. So I'm wondering if, in this case, the concept, right, or maybe the essence of the thing, right? Say I want to make a little cicada, because we're almost getting to cicadas. I want to make a little
There you go.
wax cicada.
Yeah.
Okay. So I have the idea in my mind, and I go through the process to make the mold.
Yeah.
Now the mold is the paradigm, but what started first was the idea.
Yes.
You know, and then you have the
Yes.
things that come out. I wonder if in some sense then that the idea and the mold are they're one and the same thing, but one is a deeply metaphysical type of thing, and the other one is the physical, right? And even if the physical one goes away, that idea is still there. And all of the products that have come out of that are then related to that first idea.
Because that's how you could maybe start getting at maybe even something like our participation in Christ as members of his body. You know, or like sometimes I hear people say, like, you know, we're like little Christs, not, you know, competitors, not, you know, doing our own
Well, we say,
thing.
the Imago Dei, right?
Yeah. Well, and actually, if I may, because that's a good connection
let's
here.
go there. We're going in some very great ways, but we're also getting off the
Colossians, because I had that quote. That was my longest passage. But you know, he is the. So talking about Jesus, and what's neat about this is most scholars think that this was a. So Paul is writing this in his letter to the Christians in Colossae, but he's it looks like it's not something he originally composed. It's something he's quoting. That's a hymn or a prayer, some liturgical prayer or hymn, a poem that is already well established. That his community is already familiar with it, which is interesting because this is in like the 50s A.D. So this flies in the face of those who would say that the divinity of Christ is a later development. It's like, no, it's first of all, it's in the Gospels. It's in Jesus' lifetime. He at least is purported to have claimed that he was God. But then you have this, and it says, he is the image of the invisible God. And the image it's icon there, like icon. So he is the icon of the invisible God. In other words, like John I mentioned earlier, so he is the visible expression of the invisible God, not the God who's just hidden, but I interpret that as the God who is by nature invisible. Not because our eyes are incapable of seeing him, not because we're somehow like there's a problem with him, right? It's the problems with us,
right?
Or I shouldn't say problem. The weakness, the inability is on our end. He's invisible because he's so transcendent. So Christ is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation, and that's of course tricky because he's not a creature, but you could say his human nature is created. Because there was a time when it didn't exist. For in him all things in heaven and on earth were created, things visible and invisible. So physical, material nature, and the invisible spiritual realm, the angels, principalities, all that kind of stuff. And then he says it, whether thrones or dominions or rulers, powers. So those angelic sort of categories. This is what I really enjoy. This next part: all things have been created through him and for him. So there's that. I don't want to say functionality, but that I think we're getting to the word thing there, right? Because how does Genesis depict the method with which God creates, specifically through his word? And then I think there's that connection there.
Yeah, John 1, right?
Right. Right. He himself is before all things, so like John had said, in the beginning, right? And in him all things hold together. Which is, I don't know, you probably know this, maybe I can kick it back to you because, let me just, there's like two more sentences and then there's a Paul connection to, I think, maybe not Plato, it's not Plato, I forget who it is, but you'll probably know. He is the head of the body of the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he might come to have first place in everything. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him God was pleased to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, by making peace through the blood of his cross. But back to that line that really caught me there. In him all things hold together. Paul quotes, I want to say, in Athens when he's talking to, I think, Dionysius, the not pseudo Dionysius who was in the audience, but when he quotes, I think, an ancient Greek philosopher, I forget who, when he uses that phrase, how does he put it? In him we live and move and have our being. Does that ring a bell? I forget. It might be in a footnote here. It's like Acts 15. We live and move and have our being, I think was the phrase. But that's not an Old Testament quote, if I remember correctly. He's quoting from a Greek philosophy tradition of the Logos, basically.
In my notes,
I'll find it.
I had I had referenced Timaeus, which is a...
Yes, right, okay. I have that down here.
I don't know,
that's Plato too, correct?
That is
right? Okay.
Plato. This is a, one of his more mystical books. Supposedly, it takes place the day after the scene of the Republic, right?
Okay.
So it's right around the same time. I think that's correct.
Okay.
Same proximity. Yeah, hopefully if I read this, it will resonate because something made me think of this in relation to that.
Sure.
So this is Timaeus talking, and not Socrates, and he says, "In my opinion, then, we must first distinguish the following: what is it that always is, and has no becoming. And what is it that comes to be and never is? Now the one is grasped by the intellection accompanied by rational account, since it's always in the same condition. But the other, in its turn, is opined by opinion, accompanied by irrational sensation, since it comes to be and perishes, and never genuinely is. Again, everything that comes to be necessarily comes to be by some cause. For apart from a cause, it's impossible for anything to have a coming to be.
I think that's a really good distinction too, because sometimes, you know, just even in dialogue with agnostics, but well, more specifically, I guess, atheists, you know, when and I've seen this before, if you're imprecise, I think, and you say, for example, well, you know, look around us. I mean, where did all this come from? Like, everything has a cause, you know, so the universe has to... And then sometimes people will say, well, okay, you know, smart aleck, everything needs a cause. What caused God?
Right.
I like the distinction of, well, no, everything that comes into being requires a cause to have, you know, brought it
Yes.
about. And by definition, God is that which has no, you know, that which has always existed, right? You know,
Yeah.
one way you could put it. So,
It
by
is to be.
definition,
It-
right,
it is
right.
to
the,
be,
The,
yeah.
act, you know, the existence
Yeah.
being
Yeah.
itself has no initiation because it's the thing that initiates. Well, and I found it here too because the footnote, it's Acts 17 when Paul's on the Areopagus, and he says he's trying to connect, you know, to the culture he's dialoguing with. You know, he's trying to use that good evangelization paradigm of, you know, sort of like, how do I find connection points with this particular audience, something they'll recognize, images they know, quotes they know. And he says, God, you know, he made from one the whole human race to dwell on the entire surface of the earth, and he fixed the ordered seasons and the boundaries of their regions, so that people might seek God, even perhaps grope for him and find him, though indeed he is not far from any one of us, for in him we live and move and have our being. And that's a quote, it says down here from, or it's based on a saying from Epimenides of Knossos, 6th century BC. Which is interesting in and of itself, because that's about all I know about Epimenides, but Paul knows that, like, Paul's ready to rattle that one off, you know, so I love that you get little windows into, you know, he's familiar at this point with, you can imagine, Socrates, you know, who's about 400 years before Paul, you know, that he's attempting, and it seems John, to an extent, too, has enough of a knowledge of Greek sort of philosophical reasoning and discussion and that sort of vocabulary to be able to kind of express those ideas and connect them with these very Hebrew, you know, sort of experiences. I don't know if I got us off track with that, but where were we here?
Yeah.
It's such a huge topic, you know what I mean? But yeah, how as that pertains to truth, you know, and maybe the universal nature of this desire to not be deceived, this desire to have, well, revelation.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, to know what it really is, what's it all about.
Right.
You
Right.
know, that's
and
maybe
not only not to be deceived, but this is why I started out with the idea of the eros for truth.
Yeah.
Right. By my thinking, I see that eros for truth as something that certainly motivated these earlier philosophers. And I think that is when we start moving into the transcendent. Now, you know, it's always puzzled me that, you know, even maybe the Stoics, I would say the Epicureans, maybe less so. The Epicureans were more materialist.
Okay.
But, you know, the Stoics certainly had a notion of the transcendent. You know, maybe the Epicureans, but that's beside the point. But nevertheless, my thought is that you know, certainly since Socrates, right, that there's been this longing for this truth, right? And it just maybe we'll even call it, an eros, a passion for it, to try to discover it. And what do you make of that? Is it something that is, we talk about the paradigm, right? Is there something that is paradigmatic about that to the human mind? And why is it that we have, as a a species, and certainly as a within even Western culture, why have there been these long periods where we've lapsed from that? I hesitate to bring this up or even to say it, but it seems like right now sometimes people will refer to our current milieu as something like post-truth. That we seem to not really have an interest, and maybe, and even in some sense, a hostility toward truth, capital T, truth. A lot of people
sometimes
use that
I miss the days when it was just apathy.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And now it's like, well, yeah. I mean, and that gets back to your thing earlier too about again, without getting too far off. Well, let's say too far into something that would potentially get the benevolent powers that be at YouTube to take it down,
Right, yeah.
In a disguised way, I think was it Aristotle who said, it was something you said earlier, but it's a fleshing out. I think I heard from Peter Kraft also, if I'm getting it correct, and if I can say it correct, that I guess he defined truth as, if you say of that which is that it is, and of that which is not that it is not, you speak the truth. But if you say of that which is not that it is, and of that which is that it is not, you do not speak the truth. It's like this. It sounds convoluted, but I'm like, that okay, So if there's a particular fact about your reality as a human being, it doesn't really matter how much you want it to be something different. If it's outside the realm of your sort of moral decisions, right? I mean, like, there's so many decisions we have, so many choices that we have, but at the end of the day, we don't really have, I feel like it's not really in the certainly like the Catholic moral realm, truth as it's sort of, the rubber hits the road, in our decision making and the formation of our conscience. It's not obviously like an anything goes sort of thing. Like there is this mystery of I'm up against this mystery every day that I can't just make it whatever I want it to be.
Yes, yeah.
There is something, and sometimes it's not easy to define it, but it's like, I know I can't just go around stealing homeless people's blankets. Well, why not? I'm cold. You know what I mean? It's like, well, you can't just do that. Well, what do you mean I can't do it? Well, that's wrong. What do you mean wrong? So when you start any of those, like, your dyed-in-the-wool supposed like materialist or person who doesn't believe in any objective truth or objective reality, yes, they do. At some point they do. When you do something to them, you know what I mean? So I'm rambling here, but I guess for me that's we're tapped into something that you can't get away from it even if you want to.
And they do. Here's a funny little parable for you. And maybe they have an idea of truth, but do they have the arrows for it? So
that's right. That's a good point.
I think it was the Protagoras, which is a dialogue of Plato's as well. We're hitting a lot of Plato today, which is perfectly fine, I think. So the scene in the beginning is very funny. Now, Protagoras is this very well-known sophist, right? And a sophist is a character who doesn't have so much concern for the truth as much as they do with convincing people of various things, right? They're clever, they're clever but not necessarily wise. So, a bunch of the friends of Socrates said, hey, and I hope I'm correct. I hope this is the Protagoras. I think it is. A bunch of friends of Socrates said, hey, we got to go and talk to this guy, Protagoras. He's in town visiting, and he's very well known. He's this very well known sophist, and all these other sophists are hanging out with him. And I think you're going to have a blast. You're going to have a great conversation, right? It's kind of like, you know, um, some of these, you know, like, hey, Sam Harris is in town. Let's get Bishop Barron together, or something like that. Right? Something like that. But so anyway, they show up, and I think this is very, very charming and very pithy. They knock on the door, and a eunuch opens a little thing. You know, who is it? Who are you? What do you want? Right? Now, a eunuch is guarding the door of the sophist. Right? What does a eunuch not have?
A generative capacity.
Or eros. A eunuch lacks eros. A eunuch,
yes, there you go.
So there is no eros in that room of these sophists.
That's
right. They don't have an eros for what is true.
That's an interesting connection. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it's like the I love one of my favorite books. The and followers of this channel know my affinity for C.S. Lewis, and I'm no expert, but I'd like to be one. You know, I have an eros for learning and you know, grasping all of his books and everything. But the scene in The One Exchange in The Great Divorce with, and they're not entirely clear on who the sort of character in heaven that this potential entrant into heaven is conversing with, but the figure in question is this. I guess he was an Anglican bishop, you know, in life, and his friend, who is a fellow priest or bishop or whoever, you know, who's in heaven's trying to get him to come in, and it's just one big long, you know, debate, and he's like, come in, and he's like, well, you know, we've never really clearly, you know, ascertained whether or not, you know, and he's just like, come, and he says to him at one point, you know, you're speaking of truth as if it's abstract, it's something to that effect, and he says, I will take you to where you can, you know, drink truth like water. You know, this very, not materialistic, but this just very blunt, incarnational kind of, you know, imagery. And this sad character just basically waves his hand. He's like, I can make nothing of that. You know, and it's just, it's because he's distanced himself in this, like, so he sees himself as sort of the center of the universe. And he's out there like, well, you know, this goes in here, this goes here, this goes there, this category, this thing, this theory, that, and it's like, no, you're part of that. You know, like you're a character in someone else's story, and I think that's the real trippy. So maybe trippy's not the right word to use, but it is in a way. I think, you know, that I would almost say, you know, just because we do have to unfortunately start to bring it into the final stretch here in the next few minutes. I know. but that's I feel like that's probably a big part of it, that, you know, if God is this great, you know, if he's this author of life, he's this storyteller, and all of this, everything is part of this one big story. He's the author of it, and we're having these encounters with the author and being invited, I feel like, to recognize that everyone and everything else we encounter is written by the same author, you know, and some of us are fighting over whether or not there is a story, whether or not there is an author at all, and he's standing where, that's back to Pilate, you know, what is truth? And he's like,
it reminds me a little
bit if you don't want to see it, you're not going to see it.
Yeah, it reminds me a little. You've heard of Hans Urs von Balthasar, right? You know, his idea of the theodrama.
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
A little bit like that.
Yeah. I think I was subconsciously stealing from that probably a little bit.
Hey, it's
very
it's very fecund, that whole idea, I think.
Well, and I hate to do this, but just, you know, is there any like kind of final, as far as like a capstone thing for now, as far as it's what I don't want to say is any last words. That sounds terrible. No, it's not. Nothing's over.
Yeah.
But we're just beginning. But, you know, I mean, maybe just to bring it back to, you know, the idea of the uncovering of truth.
The disclosure, right? The aletheia.
Any thoughts on that, maybe from a philosophical, just in general standpoint, or if a student you're trying to encourage who may not be coming from a religious background of any kind necessarily, but it's just toying with the idea of actually getting himself or herself some eros for the truth.
Well, yeah, no,
What do
I
you
think
do?
that
Yeah,
is the
yeah.
I think that is the most important thing, right? And
Mhm.
I also see that. All right, hopefully this won't derail us too much more.
No, no, it's
But I was thinking about this the other day because a Facebook friend of mine
Mhm.
posted something very witty. It was a little jab at the declaration that science is real
Mhm.
type of thing.
Yeah.
So we live in this.
What a ridiculous slogan. I'm sorry.
Well, her point was
What does
funny.
that
It's
even
like
mean?
these that's what her problem with it is. She was basically saying that these terms need to be need to be defined
Mhm.
rather, and certainly is in that equation needs to be defined. And I
Well,
was like,
and the
very
sort of
interesting.
the nasty, not so hidden assertion that someone like me, for example, doesn't think science is real.
Well,
You know?
I
But
think
like, yeah.
too. There's um, a part of that when it is expressed.
Mhm.
Uh, maybe I don't know. Maybe this is not so charitable per se, but there's a part of it when it is expressed that what they mean to be saying is that science is the truth,
Right.
and we'll be able to grasp the truth. And I, you know,
Or that it's the only things worth knowing
it's the only
are
channel,
those
right?
that
Yeah,
are
yes, yeah,
scientifically
yeah. And all of
verifiable,
the other things are dancing around this, which
which
I think is.
which is an authoritative, objective, almost sort of
Mhm.
religiously dogmatic statement.
It is a very
Which,
yes, yeah, very much so, yeah. And
you
as
know,
you know, many of our
yeah, it's not
uh,
that's not a scientific statement.
no,
Oddly
yeah,
enough, yeah,
it isn't, yeah. And
yeah.
so I think the problem too, and I see this a lot with students that have that sensibility about them,
Mhm.
right? When they enter to either my philosophy class or religions class, and often they'll excuse themselves in the beginning by saying, "I am more of a scientific type of person,"
Right.
right? Um, what does that mean?
I like to
Um,
ask people just in charity, what do you mean by that? Because
yeah,
I think sometimes they just get used to just saying that. You know.
my thought is they like their world to be broken down into very digestible axioms,
Mm-hmm.
you know. Um, but there's no.
Yeah. What if it's not? What if it's not possible to do?
Yeah,
Like in
well, and
reality,
here's the other thing too. It's
you
it's
know,
something that's very, and this is very.
it's a whole other show too.
It is. It is.
It's a
There's something
scientistic.
very
Yeah.
safe about that kind of
Yeah.
assertion. But
Yeah.
are we? If we're going to embark on the thrill of living,
Mm-hmm.
and I think this is what certainly my Socrates and Plato are inviting us to do, and I think this is what Christ invites us to do, and so forth, is to develop that eros for this thing, to put yourself into these regions of wonder,
Mm-hmm.
right? Of and wonder always comes with gratitude as well. I think that's another thing that
Yeah.
we often don't quite realize too. And I think too on that note, I don't want to be too aggressive here, but there's something too about the uh, there's a certain smugness I think of those who hold that the science is real type of crowd, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's call it that way. That that there's nothing more to wonder about,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's a very impoverished way. I
Yeah.
think having the eros for something, it's like having an eros for another person,
Mm-hmm.
having a passion for another person. You don't want to, you can't, as I think we were alluding to in this, you can't just grasp them in their
Mm-hmm.
totality. And if you think that you have,
Yeah.
it's not good.
Well, and
You know?
that's maybe a good, more or less, final thing I would throw in, just on this particular point of the being and becoming thing from earlier, and the like. What is Charles-ness? What is Mike-ness? It's like it's something about it is out there, like in someone else, like in another experience, and that's that.
Yeah.
That's a reflection of
Yes.
that divine donation, the Father giving the Son perfectly. That
Yeah.
expression of it's in us that you can't really, again, if you cling to yourself, you lose yourself.
And
Right there
even,
it is.
yeah,
Like
and my
giving
gosh,
you
yeah.
receive, and all of those kinds of things. Those aren't just little like things you get like cross stitched on a pillow, or
Yeah.
something. I mean, that's the mystery of the whole thing. I feel like it isn't in here. You have to go where you're not comfortable sometimes, and be challenged in a way, helping a grandparent who's dying of Alzheimer's or something, like all these kinds of things. It's suffering.
It's that
that's a whole other
ontological.
thing too.
It's that
Suffering.
ontological paradox,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That we realize who we are more, or we even become more of who we are, when we maybe share ourselves, give ourselves away, and even to a certain degree, being in community, right? Communion.
Yeah.
This idea that I'm going to discover more about myself when I put myself in relation to other people,
Yeah.
This idea of yeah, I mean, gosh, I don't want to take us down another path here, but that's another thing that drives me bonkers with what Charles Taylor, and that's a book that I highly recommend you read, Mike. I think you'd like it. A Secular Age, right? Where he has this idea of what is it? Gosh, I can't remember what. It's a certain kind of authenticity that he's describing. Oh, it's expressive or expressive authenticity. It's something like that, right?
Okay.
Where we become, where we become existentially most who we are by finding this thing that's deep within us.
Yeah.
That somehow the truth, that our truth is locked away, and we need to get to it by this deep, this almost solipsistic form of introspection.
Yeah, like digging, like you're wiping
Which-
the sweat off your brow, like digging it's down in here somewhere.
Yeah, and I find that to be a repugnant idea. I think that whatever,
I-
when we get to our essence, it's
I don't want to claim divine inspiration, but I just wrote, and then we have it on camera here. What just hit me, it turned out into a little, like, poetic, memorable thing. Give the self you are away, and find your fullest self one day.
I like that.
Yeah,
I like that.
We get it on a T-shirt.
Yeah.
But that's. I mean, Jesus said it better than that. But that's again that like, it seems scary at first when we look at it from the standpoint of what we think the truth is. Namely that, like you just said, like if that's the sort of truth I'm operating off of, well then I'm going to leave no stone unturned. My own stones and other people's stones too, like going through, and I'm gonna kind of break through every barrier, everything that's holy, everything that's sacred, lawful, whatever it takes. Like there's no end to the depravity I could potentially get myself into if I lock into this lie, this deception that basically is I am my own God. I am the primary. That's the hard thing is I'm not really. I'm an active agent. I have free will, but I'm a word spoken by somebody else. Like I'm not the be all end all of my own existence. I can throw it away.
Yeah.
I do have the free will to do that. Damnation is a very real possibility, not just an imaginary thing, but the truth, and I think this is where I kind of like ended at in my mind with my notes and stuff, was just the freedom of knowing that, the freedom of knowing Christ. Paul, Galatians 5:1, for freedom Christ has set us free. So freedom, like it's an actual state. It's that telos that you mentioned earlier. It's this perfection. The who was it? I'm gonna forget who said it, but in the eschatology course I teach, the still point of perfected beings. Heaven has. I like that description of heaven.
Yeah,
this
right.
idea that it's not so much a, you know, more of the same for all eternity. It's you have been complete, and now you get to spend this sort of eternity being this perfected, complete you.
Yeah, man.
You know,
This is making me think of, we could get into a good conversation of Dante.
there's
here,
all
I think.
right. Yeah, there's a
You know,
lot.
it's like,
So I think that's. I'm going to avoid the temptation to throw in any new stuff. So I don't know if there's any, you know, what is truth? Truth is someone. The truth of, you know, any last things you want to throw out there about it, or.
you know, in some respect, right? I mean, maybe people listening to this might think, man, they talked. How long did we talk? I don't know.
I don't even know. I'm not even looking at it.
A pretty long
Yeah,
time.
that's fine. I've seen way longer YouTube videos.
Yeah,
than this
and they might think, all right, well, you know, they never really said what it is, and I think maybe that's, you know, we try to capture, I think in vanity, you know, what is real, you know, being itself and truth and things like this, and you know, it's a little bit like grasping water or something. It kind of slips through your hands, right? So you kind of just have to sort of water kind of be in it, and then you'll experiencing it.
Swim in it.
But I don't. I mean, that's a, you know, kind of a hokey sort of way. But there's a certain degree of sincerity with that my description there. I think the truth is wonderful in the literal sense of that. Right? It is something to wonder about, and I think too, it's not. We have to make sure that we are not saying that it's, you know, it's a hopeless journey. It's a hopeless quest to grasp it.
Right.
You know, this idea.
It's not the destination. It's just the journey. Well,
Yeah,
no.
you know,
it's both.
The
It's
goal,
both.
like, you know, our goal, and even this is the idea of philosophical wisdom, and at least in the ancient sense, right, is to, through dialogue, right, to uncover. That's why truth, we call it aletheia.
Yeah.
To uncover as much as we can,
Yeah.
realizing that we can't ever that in our creaturely state, you know, what maybe Plato or Socrates might say in our corporeal manner of being, that we, you know, there now for them, I think there's a little bit of latent Gnosticism floating about in there, you know, but nevertheless there's something helpful in that description, that we can't necessarily behold truth, and again, truth is equivalent to you know, to being, right, to what is. We can't grasp the fullness of being, certainly, right, and even, you know, the whatness of, let's talk about a mundane. Philosophers love talking about chairs, right? You know, even chairness. Let's use that idea. Yeah, we can't even grasp the fullness of chair, because we know chairs are. There's constantly you know, these new ideas. I mean, we can kind of.
Yeah, how many kinds of chairs have you seen? But you never. Well, most of the time, some modern art chairs, you might freeze for a second and be like, "What is that?"
Yeah,
you know, but
I mean, we can get to some kind of essence of chair,
right?
But, you know, but still, and I guess that'll take us down to the road of phenomenology, which that's good, but we don't want to go there right now.
Another day.
But yeah. But anyway, I think that's my point. You know, is like we don't want to think on the one hand that we can grasp the truth in its essence, in its entirety, and on the other hand that it's something that we can never approach.
Right.
That it's that we can't do anything about it. That we just live our lives in desperate, you know, longing for this notion without doing anything. But no, I think we can. Yeah. And certainly, even you know, we had that conversation a few years ago about virtue, right? Virtue, I think, is in some sense the act, or the idea, really, of discovering our own our actuality, right? You know, to become virtuous.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's definitely more room for future conversations, and I think we're definitely going to do that. So, but for now, I think we'll probably just put a bow on it here.
I would enjoy. Yeah, I hope
And just maybe just say, if indeed truth is someone, and he said that that's the case. I don't know. I mean, I might be so bold to throw out there that maybe we could just ask him, to draw us further into it, to better understand, to see by his light, all these kinds of things other things we see, these references in Scripture. Maybe there's something to that after all.
Yeah, right,
So,
right, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Charles, thanks so much for coming on again here. So,
it's my pleasure. This was a good
repeat. I almost said customer, not customer. A repeat guest.
Yeah,
and you'll be back
in the
for
business
sure,
that you have.
That's right.
Yes.
Yes.
With your employees.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that was the best misspeak ever. So, thanks again so much.
Yeah,
So,
you're very welcome.
All right.
It's my pleasure.
Well, I hope you hung in there for the whole thing, because I know that's a bit of a long time. It's maybe my longest video ever, but I gotta say, it was a lot of fun, and always opens up so many more potential conversations. So hopefully you enjoyed that. I've had Charles on the program before. Definitely planning on having him again in the future for different topics, and we'll just sort of see where things go. So until next time, as always, guys, check out thegraciousguest.org. Everything is over there. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Please subscribe to the podcast. Please share this far and wide. For those of you who really just lit things up on YouTube with this Shroud of Turin video that I put together a few months back, you'll be excited to know that there's more Shroud of Turin stuff coming, because that video got a lot of views, by far my most viewed video of all time. And so that opened up some conversations with people who reached out to me, potential interviews with some very legit Shroud of Turin experts, people potentially maybe even from the original Shroud of Turin research project. So I'm pretty thrilled. But as always around here at The Gracious Guest, pretty much anything goes as long as it has to do with wonder and awe. So until next time, don't forget to wonder. Take care.